All right, so we are in our second week of a sermon series entitled Boundaries. And the one thing about boundaries is boundaries are so important to the way that we live our lives. I promise you can't live a healthy, physical, emotional, and spiritual life without healthy boundaries. Matter of fact, you show me a healthy person, I'll show you a person who has good boundaries, okay? And this is important because I need you to know that I am not an expert in this field, but I do know how to read, and I have a book called Boundaries. And it's interesting because as I lifted this up last week and you heard the sermon, I had at least 3 people stop me as we went out and said, "Pastor, as you were preaching, I hope you're okay with this, but I got on my phone and I ordered this book." And then I had another 3 in emails that I received telling me the same thing, that they went ahead and bought the book as well. Now, I'm not getting a commission on this, okay? So I'm not telling you got to go out and buy this book. But I will say is if you're interested, I'm going to leave it right here on the front. And if you want to come up and kind of peruse it, see if it's for you, you can. The other thing to note is I'm going to give you a lot of the stuff. We're going to take the highlights of this book and kind of bring them to fruition. I'm going to be sharing it with you. So a lot of the stories come right out of the book, okay? And that's important for you to know. Because if you get the book and you say, "Hey, Jason told that story," well, this is my source material. This is where I got it from, okay? I'm giving it up. But I think it's important as well. And boundaries, just, the first week, we really looked at what does a boundaryless life look like. And I had so many people tell me, "Pastor, that just sounded like my life." Well, it sounds like all of our lives if we don't really engage the importance of boundaries, that we're always going to get into some trouble. And there's going to be pain and chaos will kind of come from that. And I tell you that, just number one, if you missed it, you can go back and pick it up and watch it online. So we've got that for you. At the same time, you'll still get something out of today as well. Okay, they go together, but you don't have to watch one to understand the other one. So all that we have today is going to be applicable. Plus, we're going to look at her life at the end, and we're going to see a life of how chaotic it was without boundaries and what health is going to look like when she actually kind of comes to understand the need for boundaries. So we're going to bookend it that way. Now, I do want to say this because it is so important for us to have boundaries. I'll have people come to me and say, "Pastor, when you say that we need to have boundaries, that sounds so many times like it's unloving." And I want to say it is absolutely just the opposite. And I'm going to give you a biblical model for this, okay? I've said this before, so you may remember it. If you don't, that's okay. But you remember they went to Jesus, and they were actually trying to trap Jesus. Which commandment is the most important? You got the 10, pick the one that we really need. Because then whatever he said, they were going to kind of try to nail him on the other ones that he didn't say. And Jesus said, "Well, you know the 10 commandments, right? Yeah, keep those." And then he added to it. He just kind of went back into the scriptures even. And he said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." There's actually a hierarchy of love that gets presented here from Jesus Christ. The first thing that we hear is, and people really don't get this one wrong. If I asked you, where's your love supposed to be focused on? Everybody's going to go, "Oh, no, that's God. We're supposed to love God." And that's true. That's exactly the way Jesus puts it. But then that's the second one we get confused on. Because then I'll say, "Okay, well, who's next?" And they'll go, "Oh, well, others and then self." And so I want to ask you, is that what the Bible says? It says, love others as yourself. So it starts with us having a love of God. And then it becomes a healthy love of self. And I really do mean a healthy love. That we can get what we need from our relationship with God. And when we get what we need from our relationship with God, we don't demand that other people give us what God can give us. And so therefore, we're not using people to feel good about ourselves. We're not using people's situations to make us feel like we have worth. We're not helping people just because we need that person to feel help for us and then say thank you to us because we've done good for them. No, we love God and we give that love away. And so we have a healthy love of other people. But it starts with a healthy love of ourselves. I would actually say if we don't have a healthy love of self, we can't love other people. Okay? All of our love is going to have a taint to it because it's always going to be about, we're going to love other people as an extension of loving ourselves. And that's what we want to try to get away from. Love God, love self, not an egotistical love, a healthy love. And then from a healthy love, truly love and serve others. And that's so important. So today we really want to look at boundaries and what does a boundary look like. I shared this story, and the story I'm about to share came from the book. And at the 8:30 service, I probably had 10 people pull me aside and said, Pastor, I think that story was something that I could have used at one time. So I want to tell you this story. The parents of a 25-year-old man came to me with a common request: fix our son. And so I asked, where is your son? And they answered, he didn't want to come. And I asked why. And they responded, well, he doesn't think he has a problem. To their surprise, I said, well, maybe he's right. Tell me about it. Well, the parents began to recite a litany of problems that had begun at a very young age. Bill, their son, had never been quite up to snuff in their eyes. In recent years, he'd had trouble with drugs and an inability to stay in school. It was apparent that they loved their son very much and were heartbroken over the way he was living. They tried everything they knew to get him to change. They tried everything they could do to help him to be responsible for his life. They'd always given their son everything he needed. While he was in school, they gave him plenty of money. When he flunked out of school, they helped him get into another school that was a better fit for him. Listening to them talk for a while, I then said, I think your son's right. He doesn't have a problem. You do. After a very long silence, the father said, did I hear you right? You think we're the problem? And I said, that's right. He doesn't have a problem. You do. He does whatever he wants. No problem. You pay for it. You fret over it. You worry. You plan. You exert energy to keep him going. He has no problem. If anything, you're taking his problem away from him. Well, I can help you to help him to be responsible for his own problems. I can do this by helping you to be clear about what your boundaries are. As it stands now, he's irresponsible and happy, and you're responsible and miserable. The father asked, but isn't that a bit cruel just to stop helping like that? I then asked, has helping him helped? It was at that point that the parents began to understand the importance of boundaries. Does that resonate? You heard me say this just a little bit last week, but one of the things that we always like to do is we like to try to fix people. But we can't. You can't fix anybody. You know why? Because God didn't give you that power. The only person you can fix is you. That's the only person that God made you responsible for, okay? And so let's draw some boundaries. Let's look at what those boundaries look like so we can kind of reclaim our own lives, so that we can say, we can be empowered to live. And here's the interesting thing is, when I'm empowered to live, and I live to the full healthiness that I can live to, I do have a power. You've heard me say this again, is a power of influence. That if you want to be with me and I have healthy boundaries, you're going to have to be healthy. You're going to have to respect my boundaries. We're going to be in relationship, and it's going to be life-giving for me and for you. But there has to be things that are appropriate and inappropriate. And that's okay. There's no reason to apologize for that. Now, let's look at boundaries, because boundaries help us to define things. And let's look at the things that boundaries help us to define. The first thing that a boundary helps us to define are my responsibilities. In the physical world, boundaries are easy to see. They're fences, signs, walls, hedges, moats with alligators. These are boundaries. The message is clear. This is where my property begins. We have physical boundaries and visible property lines. In emotional and the spiritual world, boundaries are just as real. But here's the difficulty. They're harder to see. In reality, these boundaries define your soul, and they help you to guard your soul and maintain it. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 says it very clear. Above all else, guard your heart, for your heart is a wellspring of life. Second, boundaries help us to define me and not me. And this is important. Knowing what I own and what I'm responsible for actually gives me freedom. Now, here's an example for you. And it's a little far-fetched. But let's say I have a house and all of my yard and my neighbor's yards all kind of go together. There's nothing that really demarks what is mine and what's not. Am I responsible for mowing everybody's yard? No. Am I responsible for mowing my yard? And does that have an impact? Because if I don't take care of my yard, will that impact my neighbor's yard? Because our yards really kind of come right together. And if my yard is unhealthy, will my neighbor's yard always be healthy? Am I responsible for watering my yard and my neighbor's yard and all of my neighborhood? No. So we got to understand what I'm responsible for. And then that's what, again, there's great freedom that comes with that. Because I got to make sure I take care of my business. Because that leads us really to the next point. Well, before I get to the next point, I got to tell this other story. A good friend asks you to guard his property while he's away, and you say, sure. But your friend doesn't tell you the boundary lines. You've no idea what you're supposed to protect. My friends, I'm here to tell you, not only is that confusing, that's potentially dangerous. This is what emotionally and spiritually happens if we're not clear about our boundaries, about what we're responsible for and not responsible for. God designed a world where we all live within ourselves. In other words, we inhabit our own souls and we're responsible for the things that make up who we are. We have to deal with what is in our soul, and boundaries help us to define what that is. If we're not shown parameters or are taught wrong parameters, we're in for a whole lot of pain in this life. Boundaries mean that we are responsible for ourselves. We are in control of ourselves. But nowhere in the Bible are we commanded to have control over others, even though we spend a lot of time and energy trying to do exactly that. Which leads to the third point, 2 and 4. We are responsible to others, and we're responsible for ourselves. When we get in a world of trouble is when we live for others and not to others. Galatians 6:2 says, carry each other's burdens. Many times others have burdens they need help with because they can't do it with their own strength, resources, and knowledge. Now, we have to be careful. We bear burdens, we help, but we don't take responsibility for others and enable others to not take responsibility for themselves. I think that's why the Apostle Paul goes on to say in Galatians 6:5, each one should carry their own load. Number 4, boundaries is good in and bad out. Boundaries help us to distinguish our property so that we can take care of it. They help us to guard our hearts with due diligence. We need to keep the things that nurture us inside our fences and the things that harm us outside our fences. Boundaries help us to keep the good in and the bad out. Sometimes we have bad on the inside and we have good on the outside. And so we have to allow the bad out and the good in, because that's the other way these boundaries have to work. Boundaries have to be permeable. You have to open them up to let the bad stuff out. Sometimes you have to open them up to let the good stuff in. But here's the thing, you still have control over your boundary. You know, there's some examples of here. I have some sin or pain in my life, and that pain's within me. And I have to open up. I have to communicate my sin and my pain and my difficulty with God. And then I open up and I let it out. And then as I'm open, I'm also allowing God's love and grace and forgiveness and healing to come in. Revelations 3:20 says, Jesus is saying this, here I am. I stand at the door and I knock. And if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me. Notice what that scripture doesn't say. I stand at the door and knock. And if you don't answer, I'll kick your door out and I'll come right on in. And we'll be together. Jesus doesn't say that. Why? Because if Jesus kicked the door down to our life, we'd be violated. Our boundary would be taken advantage of. Jesus knocks and then waits to let us respond. Will we open the door? Isn't that just absolutely beautiful, this image? Healthy image that we have from our God? I want to be with you. I want to commune with you. I want you to know how much I love you. It also doesn't say that he knocks and then rings the doorbell and then knocks some more and then keeps knocking and keeps bugging you and then keeps coming back. No. I knock and then I wait. You're given a choice. It's your boundary. God doesn't violate your agency. God doesn't violate your personhood. I mean, it's really, truly, absolutely beautiful way to understand God. Again, boundaries aren't walls. They're like the cells in our own bodies. On our cell walls, well, they let the good in and they let the bad out. Now, this concept of boundaries comes from the very nature of God. God defines God's self as distinct and a separate being who is responsible for God's self. In 1 John 4:16, God tells us that God is love and that he is not darkness. We are made in the likeness of God. And then Genesis 1:26, that God has given us personal responsibility with limits. Boundaries are anything that help us differentiate ourselves from others. And boundaries show us where you begin and where you end. Now, here are some examples of boundaries, and we'll go over these rather quickly, okay? But examples of boundary, number one is skin. Skin is the most basic of all boundaries. Ever had personal boundaries violated and said something like, that person really gets under my skin? That's why you said that. Victims of physical and sexual abuse have a poor sense of boundaries because early in their life they were taught that their property didn't start with their skin. And you need to hear me really clear. Your boundary starts with your skin. Second, words. Words are examples of boundaries, and we have some powerful words. And I'm going to tell you the two most powerful words we have. Yes and no. Maybe we should use those more and use them more clearly. Okay? I mean, even Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. If you want to set boundaries, practice yes and no. Number three is truth. Truth is a boundary. To be in touch with God's truth is to be in touch with reality and to live in accord with that reality because it makes for a better life. Now, I know that so many times we're going to argue about truth and how we define it and how we see our world. My friends, I'm not asking you for your opinion, and I'm not trying to give you my opinion. I have a perspective and you have a perspective, but there's one perspective we really need, and that's God's. That's who we got to hear from. Now, let's stop working really hard to make God fit our perspective. You know what I'm saying? It's okay. The truth is, the truth that God is always trying to tell us is never going to be a convenient truth. It's always going to be painful. It's always going to call us to a sense of justice and to a sense of mercy, to a sense of not meeting the obligations that we need to meet as those who are believers and followers of Jesus Christ. And so let's always ask the question, where is God's truth? What does God say? That's never an easy one to ask, but it's always a good one to wrestle with, because that's when we can understand when boundaries are being violated. 4, geographical distance. One of the ways we show people our boundaries, we create space. We get away from that person. We move away from that person. We move states away from that person. Some of you are laughing because you've probably done it yourself or someone's done it to you. But that's one of the ways that we have to create boundaries. Number 5 is time. Taking time off from a person or a project can be a way of regaining ownership over some of our out-of-control aspects of our life and the much-needed boundaries that we need to have. Number 6 is emotional distance. Now, this is a temporary boundary to give your heart the space it needs to be safe. It's not a permanent way to live because we don't always just need to keep everybody emotionally distant. But sometimes we need to take a little emotional break because we need to figure things out. We need to connect our head and our heart. So emotional distance is a very powerful thing. Number 7 is other people. I mean, there's really two reasons why you need others to help you with boundaries. And your first is your most basic need in life is for relationship. We are actually hardwired to have relationships. Healthy people have relationships, and they have to have healthy relationships. So we need each other. The other thing is we need other people, especially if they're healthy and we're having trouble. They give us a gift. A real friend can give us a tremendous gift. You know what that friend is? And I'm not saying that friend just kind of saddles up alongside of us and says, oh, it's okay. I mean, a real friend gives us this thing called perspective. Well, I heard what you said, but let me share what I see. Let me give you a non-emotional, connected response and see if we can't help name it. That's powerful. If you have a good friend like that who can speak truth in times that you need it, that makes all the difference in the world. And lastly, number 8 are consequences. You know, God speaks to us again and again about this whole concept of you reap what you sow. And it's true. If we put bad seeds in the ground, are we going to get a good crop? We're going to get a healthy crop? If we do good things and we plant good things and wholesome things and the things of love and grace, what are we going to get? What's going to come back to us? Good things, right? Blessed things, holy things. I mean, that's why we have to be careful, because there's always going to be consequences. And you know what? This is one of the hardest things for parents. Now, I'm going to go on outside the book here. But that's okay. But what I want to say to you is this. Parents, we have to allow our children to have pain in their life. If I was to ask you the things that have helped create you and make you and shape you, the person that you've been, you probably would take me to all the good things that happened. You'd also kind of take me to things that were difficult, that you learned so much from. Don't take away those opportunities from your kids. God put them there so that they could learn. They're consequences of their actions. Now, it's interesting because I think about my kids growing up. And on a cold day, I might say, hey, don't forget your jacket. And they go, yeah, whatever, Dad. And they run outside. And then I'll ask them, well, how was school? It was really cold. Like, really? I wonder who told you to get your jacket. Now, as long as it's a day like today, it can, being cold's uncomfortable. Now, if it's freezing, I might really say you have to take it, because the consequence of that might be frostbite. And that might be a little harsh. So as a parent, we always have to kind of balance that. Where do we get involved? And where do we allow pain to be pain? Because here's the thing. This is true about maturity. If we really want to be mature, I love this definition. Maturity is our ability to allow somebody that we love to experience transitory pain. Transitory means they're going to learn from this pain, and that we step back and let them have consequences to their actions. That's not a bad thing. Now, if there's pain that's going to end their life, yeah, we got to step in, okay? You're hearing me on that. But I need to be mature in myself, and I need to trust God. That God is going to work through those consequences to teach things that are more powerful than sometimes I could teach on my own. How many times have we said, I would just want to spare my children the pain that I have, so I want to tell them all the things I did wrong. We've all felt that way. They're not going to listen. They will listen to consequences. They speak louder than anything a parent will ever say. Ultimately, we all need boundaries to be healthy, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And living with boundaries or without boundaries is a choice. God always gives us a choice. Joshua 24:15 says, "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." If having boundaries is undesirable to you, then choose. Choose a life of boundaries and health, or a life that's boundaryless and the chaos that comes with it. But for me on this day, I choose boundaries because I choose healthiness. I choose God, and I choose to serve in love. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Weekly Teaching. To watch the full live stream of this worship service, you can view all archived streams at the Alamo Heights UMC YouTube channel. If you have any questions, email us at podcasts@ahumc.org. That's podcasts@ahumc.org. You can also visit our website, ahumc.org, anytime. Any related links are also in this episode's show notes. Again, thank you so much for being a listener. We truly appreciate your time